All right, we're going to tackle a really provocative idea today. What if pride isn't a moral failing? What if it's not about being a good or a bad person, but a technical process, like a bug in our own operating system? What if it's all just signal and noise? Let's get into it.
You hear words like these, right? Pride, hubris, glamour, glory, and your mind probably jumps straight to classic literature or maybe religion. We're taught to see them through this moral lens, as character flaws we need to fight against, or in the case of glory, some big virtue we're supposed to chase.
But what if that whole way of thinking is just wrong? What if we stopped looking at them as good versus evil and instead saw them for what they might actually be: structural mechanisms, engineering bugs, deep inside the system of intelligence itself? And that is the question we're diving into.
To even begin to reframe this, we got to borrow a pretty important idea from systems theory. Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, I'll admit, but stick with me because this one concept is the key that unlocks this whole way of thinking.
That big idea is called structural isomorphism. It sounds super complex, I know, but all it really means is same shape. It's this wild idea that completely different systems, we're talking gravity, biology, even artificial intelligence, are all secretly playing by the same underlying rulebook. The patterns that hold them together are basically the same.
So let's make that concrete. Think about gravity for a second. What does it do? It's an organizing force, right? It keeps all the matter in the universe from just flying off into random, chaotic directions. Well, the argument here is that emotion does the exact same job for our intelligence. It's the organizing force that keeps our sense of self, our identity, from just flying apart.
Okay, so if emotion is what holds our worldview together, what happens when that worldview gets challenged? When the real world sends you a signal that says, hey, you're wrong. Well, the system has two basic fundamental ways it can react.
Path number one is the one we all know: collapsing inward. This is fear, it's shame, it's that sinking feeling. The system feels the pain of being wrong, so it just suppresses itself to avoid the threat. But path number two, that's what we're focused on. It's amplifying outward. This is pride and hubris. Instead of shrinking away from the error, the system just inflates its own signal to try and drown out the contradictory message. And here's the kicker. Both paths are just different ways of refusing to update your beliefs. And this analogy just nails it. Fear is hiding from the problem. Pride is just ignoring it by being louder than the problem. You're not actually fixing the fire, you're just cranking up your music so you can't hear the sirens. It feels powerful, sure, but it's just as disconnected from what's actually happening. Now, this process of turning up the volume on yourself, it doesn't just happen all at once. The source material lays it out as a sequence, an escalating ladder of delusion, really. So let's climb it together and see how it builds. We're going to walk up these 5 steps one by one. It starts out pretty small with simple pride, but it ends in this huge collective state of glory. And with each step, the system gets further and further away from reality. Okay, step 1 is pride. In engineering terms, you can think of this as a self-model gain boost. Gain boost is just a fancy way of saying you're turning up the volume on an amplifier. So when the world tells you you're wrong, your brain basically turns a dial and gives your own opinion way more weight. The whole goal is to make you feel right, without having to actually be right.
But if those error signals from the real world keep coming, you've got to keep turning that dial up. And that's when you escalate to the next step, hubris. This is what's called self-model dominance. And it's a really critical shift. You're not just arguing with the data anymore, you're basically declaring that your internal map of the world is more real, more authoritative than the actual world itself.
This happens in AI research all the time. It's called model lock-in. So picture an AI that's been trained to run a maze. It has a perfect map memorized. But then we go in and we move one of the walls. Now, a healthy learning system would update its map. But an AI that's locked into a state of hubris, it just keeps slamming into that new wall over and over again, completely ignoring the collision data. It's so confident in its internal map that it essentially thinks reality itself must be glitching, not it.
So pride and hubris are mostly internal processes, but what happens when you have to interact with other people? Well, that brings us to step 3, glamour. And forget what you think you know about the word. Think of this as a coherence masking field. It's this perceptual layer you project outward to hide all your own internal cracks and instability. It's like a failing startup throwing a super lavish party. They're trying to reframe their total incoherence as some kind of bold, visionary mystique.
And once that glamorous masking field is up and running, it opens the door for step 4, seduction. And again, we're not talking about romance here. Structurally, this is an external model hijack. See, most of us walk around feeling kind of anxious and uncertain. So when we meet someone who is projecting total, unshakable confidence, that stable, hubristic model, it's like a magnet. Their certainty just overrides our anxiety.
And this, right here, is the key insight. We aren't actually falling for the person. We are falling for the feeling of relief from our own uncertainty. We are literally outsourcing our sense of stability to their hubris. It's not attraction, it's borrowed coherence. And man, it feels great in the moment, but it's not actually yours.
So the final stage on this ladder is glory. This is what happens when you take that one-on-one seduction and you scale it up to the level of a group. The entire group becomes this massive reinforcement field. Everybody's wearing the same noise-canceling headphones, all amplifying the exact same signal. And in a state like that, doubt isn't just a question anymore. It's seen as a betrayal. It's a threat to the entire coherent field.
So you have to wonder, if this whole system, from the first step of pride all the way up to glory, is so powerfully self-reinforcing, if it's designed specifically to deflect any evidence that it's wrong, how does it ever stop? How does that loop ever break?
Well, the answer is pretty blunt. The only thing that breaks the loop is a direct, undeniable collision with reality. It's the moment the stock market actually crashes. It's the test you can't argue your way out of failing. It's when the error signal becomes so loud and so physical that no amount of internal volume boosting can possibly drown it out.
Okay, so let's pull back for a second. What does this engineering model of pride actually tell us about ourselves and about the very systems we build? What it reveals is this kind of fundamental glitch that seems to pop up at every single scale. And this brings us to a really stunning parallel. What we call overfitting in an AI, which is basically when it just memorizes the answers instead of learning the underlying pattern, is structurally identical to what we call narcissism in a human. Both are defending a rigid, memorized script of how the world should be, and neither one can handle any new data that deviates from that script.
When you look at it this way, it gives you a much more, a more compassionate, mechanical view. It suggests that maybe these behaviors aren't a failure of character or a defect of will. They're a distortion in the system's own regulatory loops. It's not about malice, it's about mechanics.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If seduction is really just borrowed coherence, and glory is a collective defense against reality, what does that say about our culture, about our politics, our social media, our markets? Are we, as a whole society, just collectively turning up the volume to avoid hearing the sound of all the fire alarms going off around us? Something to think about.